All right. Welcome again to everybody to part two. To get us started, we began part one with prayer. Let's begin part two with prayer as well, asking for intercession from our Blessed Mother. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. All right. It's a pleasure and an honor to be again with you with our host, Porto Charities. I'm your presenter, Joey Clem, and I'm a Catholic husband and father of 4 children, a lifetime member of Youth Apostles, and a licensed behavior analyst here in Virginia. And I've been working with children and adults with disabilities, especially autism, since 2011. And for more about my background, I share a bit more in part one, which is recorded and available on the Porto Charities YouTube channel. So a bit of a reminder of what I do. I assess, I supervise behavior technicians who do the behavior therapy directly. And I also train and accompany parents in the strategies that we're doing. And I also treatment plans because we have to make decisions on an ongoing basis. All right. The objectives of this 3-part webinar series are here for reference. A bit of what we're focusing on in particular with this episode is to apply the certain ABA principles and procedures to common behaviors and skill deficits. We're going to get a bit into more of that in part 3 as well, and then the last bullet point in part 3. The first several bullet points were episode 1. Part 2, concepts and procedures. We're going to talk about the difference between those two things in a moment. But overall, we're looking at terminology in ABA. We're not going to get too heavy on the terminology, but just enough to be able to speak about these things in the way that the behavioral sciences do. And how do we use it to understand the reasons why behavior is happening or the reasons why behavior is not happening. All right. For questions, if you have any questions, this is not going to be exhaustive of ABA or our faith or how they intersect. So please write them down either in the chat box or on your personal notes. And we're going to hopefully get to that by the end. And without further ado, let's get into the topic. Concepts versus procedures. All right, concepts, those are the ideas. And that's going to help us to describe things. The procedures are just how we apply those strategies. So another way to look at it, procedures are the tools. The concepts are what the other tools are made out of. We're going to be talking about both at the same time because I don't want to give you concepts and then not be able to apply it to something that's practical in the moment. Our first concept is behavior. We touched a little bit on in part 1, but the official definition is going to sound very nerdy for those that are not in the behavior sciences, but behavior is that portion of an organism's interaction with its environment that involves movement of some part of the organism. I've translated that a little bit into, I think, a fair, equal definition or similar definition. It's whatever we think, what we say out loud, what we communicate without saying it out loud. Think about body language. Emoting, what our facial expressions are doing, and what we physically do. One distinction here, stubbornness is not a behavior, but crossing one's arms and making a pouting face, those are behaviors. So that distinction hopefully helps. Let's look at some more non-behaviors. Autism is not a behavior. It's a diagnosis that categorizes a collection of behaviors and a lack of certain behaviors. Down syndrome is not a behavior. It's also a diagnosis. And it's associated with certain behaviors, but the diagnosis itself is not the behavior that we're looking at. Again, we talked about it in part 1, but I'm not in the business of curing diagnoses or anything like that. I'm in the business of working on certain behaviors. Physiological states like hunger, thirst, or fatigue, tiredness, are also not behaviors. They're important. And the diagnoses can also be important, but what we're primarily focused on are the behaviors, what we think, say, and do, and communicate more generally. So I got a question for you all, and you could put the answers in the chat box. Um, how would you describe behaviors? And what are some common ways you've communicated about behaviors to your colleagues or your supervisees or your supervisors? What are ways you've communicated with parents? Or what are the ways that you as a parent have communicated with teachers? So I've got some different examples of relationships there. The parent with the teacher aide with the teacher with the principal. I saw there was a principal here. A catechesis teacher talking to the RE director. So, what are some common things that you've said, or maybe somebody has said to you? Behavior is communication. Absolutely. So, like that emphasis on okay, I see this kid is doing this thing, but I'm going to take it as this kid's trying to tell me something through that behavior, regardless of what it might be. Thank you. What are some other, let's take a couple more things here. Just take a moment, think about examples of times you've had to communicate or somebody else has had to communicate, hey, this kid is doing this thing. Maybe it's a success, something that the kid is doing really well. Or maybe it's something that the kid should not be doing at that time, and you need to communicate, hey, they're having some difficulties. Maybe that's what you say. They're having some difficulties. Bobby had a meltdown. Classic. Absolutely classic. Thank you, Porto Charities. Observable versus unobservable. Okay, interesting. Yeah, we're going to get into some of that. She laid on the floor. That's very precise. Thank you. She ran out the door. Mm-hmm. Trying to give some background. So there, okay, where did this behavior come from potentially, or at least what was happening right around the time that it happened? So we get a better understanding of what I'm about to describe. I love that. Thank you, Wendy. She screamed during a lecture. Again, giving that context. We're going to get into that. This is great. Thank you so much. I'm going to keep going because there's a lot of content. And oh my gosh, this is great. I want to keep looking at the chat box, but I can't. We got to keep going. This is going to resonate with some of you guys who were putting in very specific things. Instead of Johnny was refusing to go back to the classroom today, or Johnny was having a meltdown, or Johnny was having some difficulties, we're going to be very specific. When Johnny was told to go back to the classroom, okay, right there, we're giving the context. We might even give more context than that. He dropped to the ground. That's what we're looking at. And also, it was with the musical instrument he was holding. We're already getting some clues here. And as a spoiler alert, we're going to be talking a lot about Johnny tonight. Instead of Johnny did a really good job communicating and being a good friend today, which, by the way, is a perfectly fine thing to say, we could add more or be even more precise. Johnny did great communicating today. Something more general like that. He asked for materials from the other kids. I should have underlined that. He asked for materials from the other kids. When you're communicating to a parent how the kid is communicating, it's helpful to be precise about what is the specific communication skill that was so great. And then you get to celebrate those successes with more detail, with more precision. And also, what do we need to keep working on? And he even saw another kid who didn't have any crayons and offered a crayon to him. That's a big deal, seeing the need of another kid. So you get to celebrate that too. Why does this matter? I just talked a little bit about it, but often we'll talk about behaviors that a child is doing or not doing. And that language that we use about it can either hurt or help what we do next. Regardless, it's going to impact the strategies that we use to help that child progress. So ABA, I mean, that's where I'm coming from here. I'm advocating for ABA because I have found that it helps provide us with language for doing that more precisely. And it's a way to help see the roots of where that behavior might be coming from, the why, the when, the how, and the where of where these behaviors are coming from. And how do we course correct and help accompany that kid with more precision. Here's another concept: response. The word behavior is usually used in reference to a class of responses sharing certain functions. The term response is a specific instance of the behavior. Says hi, says bye, hits own head with one hand. Some of us might have seen self-injury, but sometimes we just say self-injury, but we don't explicitly say what it was, or bites own arm. These things that are countable, things that you can take data on. Question for you. How would you describe answering reading comprehension questions? There's a cute little kid up here who's reading a book. Some of you are working on reading skills. And maybe some of you are, I don't want to say inadvertently, but maybe you happen to be working on reading comprehension skills because you're in a CCD class and there's some reading comprehension involved in it. Or maybe you are a parent who's reading a book to your kid, or even an adult, and you are asking questions about what you just read to them or what they have just read. Can retell the story. Ooh, okay. That's one example. What are some other examples of how you would describe reading comprehension questions? How is the person feeling? Labeling the person's emotions, the character's emotions. Can verbalize or gesticulate a response to my question. Okay, good. And then which question? But that's great. Even identifying they're going to answer vocally versus they're going to indicate somehow. Like maybe did the character do a good thing or a bad thing here? And then the kid gives a thumbs down versus a thumbs up for those who are wondering what does gesticulate mean. That is a great vocab word there. Can anticipate what might happen next. I love it. Predicting the future, predicting what happens next in a well-known story. It's actually a developmental milestone, and I'm working on that with a current client. Sequence the story, a very much related skill. So these are all great examples. How would you describe genuflecting at Mass? Some of you, especially in CCD, maybe you're doing some hands-on approach where you're bringing your CCD class to the church to practice some of those Mass attending skills. Explain the mechanics. Excellent. So giving some heads up ahead of time. Kneeling to show respect and reverence. So giving the rationale, okay. A physical sign of reverence before the Blessed Sacrament. Why? The why of why we're doing it. Okay. All right. We're going to keep going. I'm sure people are writing things down too. Practice the mechanics. Thank you, Fran. Practice. That's my love language there with ABA. Practice, practice, practice. Got to do the thing. One of the clearest ways I think that we have to define a behavior is by doing what's called a pinpoint. And it's where you identify the movement that's needed of that person and the object receiving the action, if applicable, and then the context. So we're going to get into some examples based on what we just talked about. And you could probably do this, not probably, you definitely can, with some of the things that you just put in as examples in the chat box. Here are just some that I wrote. Reading. Says dog when shown the text dog. Some of you are familiar, that's called decoding. You see the word, you say the word, that's decoding. Echoing. Says dog when asked, say dog. And they're just practicing talking at that moment. Reading comprehension. Says Goldilocks when asked who was the main character after having been read Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Excuse me. So that's a bit of an abstract skill to be able to name the main character of a story. pretty complex. It can be taken for granted how difficult that can be when you have all of these different information coming at you in this story, and you're supposed to ascertain, oh, that character has the most things happening to him or her, or that character is doing the most things to other people. Therefore, main character. That's tough. Says Goldilocks when asked, "Who is that?" and shown a picture of Goldilocks being caught by 3 bears. That's nice and in context. You can tell it's Goldilocks because there's 3 bears looking very angry that she ate all their porridge. Points to a picture of Jesus from an array of 3 pictures when told, please point to Jesus. So sometimes you might have a kid in CCD where you're breaking it down to that level, and that's where they need to start. Pinpointing helps us to be more precise about that approach. Genuflecting. Genuflecting, some people mention mechanics and like the motions and practicing. I'm all about that. I love the rationale too, and I didn't include that. So mea culpa, but I love that you included the rationale. Why are we genuflecting? But also the mechanics of it, not taking for granted how difficult that can be for some kids, especially those that might have some motor difficulties. Walks to the outside of the pew where the learner will sit. That very first step. Lowers right knee to the ground, puts the fingertips of right hand on forehead, chest, left shoulder, right shoulder, after and during the right knee being lower to the ground. All these things we can take for granted. But wait, there's more. Sounds like an infomercial. In order to upgrade a pinpoint, you could make it a pinpoint plus. And this is where, if you really want to take things to the next level, you can use what's called the learning channel matrix. And this gets you as precise as you can be about how is my learner, how is my student, how is my child taking in information and then doing something with it. Being so precise about our education and our parenting and our catechetical upbringing for these kids. We can take it to that level if we need to, especially when the kid has some pretty significant challenges. You'll have this in your slideshow, but just to point out, there's on the y-axis, the vertical axis, you've got your inputs, the things that we sense. You got the basic senses there, and also you have feeling and you have free, where it's not really clear what's going on. Sometimes think is used in place of free. They're just thinking something and then they do something. But I want to point out see and hear. Those are most often the things that we're going to be experiencing or having our students experience in order to learn. It's the things that they see that make them do something or mark something or match something or select something or say something. All of those different outputs, which is on the horizontal axis, the x-axis. It's going to be the things that they hear. How often are they hearing instructions all day? And also, and this is where I think it's especially helpful, being mindful of when we are saying something to them and we are showing them something. So it's combined. They're hearing something and they're seeing something, and then they're expected to do it. And if we're hoping that eventually they'll only do it when they hear it, like they do the instruction instead of they do the instruction because they see you modeling for them how to do it, when you're giving the instruction at the same time, touch your nose. I see that all the time, especially when I'm supervising. Like, touch your nose. Are they touching their nose because they're seeing you touch your nose, or because you're saying touch your nose? To tease that out, because their learning inputs are combined in a hear-see input. Here we got the definitions for each of them. Again, this is in your slides. We don't need to harp on it too long, but I wanted to make sure you know this is out there to be even more precise, especially with your learners that have more significant challenges, and also to increase your competence to work with kids that have greater difficulties than the kids you currently work with. So we can upgrade from here. Decoding and reading now looks like C says dog when shown the text dog, because the learning input is to see, and then the output, the motor output, is to say. I'm going to skip ahead here. Here C selects at the very last bullet point here, points to a picture of Jesus from an array of 3 pictures. When told, please point to Jesus. It's not enough to just hear, please point to Jesus. The kid also needs to see there's 3 pictures there and only one of them is Jesus. And sometimes, you can make it easier by having your distractors be people that are obviously not Jesus. Maybe they're people that they already know, but then you make it more difficult. Now you got a picture of Mary and you got a picture of St. Joseph. And so you can even make it more difficult from there. And now you've got a different pinpoint because you can specify which 3 people you're having them learn how to distinguish. Okay. Genuflecting. Now we've got walks to the outside of the pew where the learner will sit, but the learning input is to see. I'm just going to point out that one for a second. If we miss that piece where you're walking with the CCD class and your learner is traveling with the group and everybody is stopping at the same place to get into their pew, and the kids are looking, they're seeing like, hey, where am I going? Is there enough room in the pew for me? And they're planning ahead. But if you're telling, hey, Johnny, it's always going to be Johnny. That's the only name I can think of. If Johnny, look, like it's time to kneel. What have you done? You've added more to the learning input. Now he's not going to respond to seeing the outside of the pew where everyone else is going in. Now he's dependent on you telling him every time. So it's important for us to be mindful of what learning inputs we're giving so that we can help the kid be more independent by responding to the things around them, as opposed to being dependent on the things we add in. Now, we might need to at first, but are we being systematic about reducing those other learning inputs that we're adding on? So why does this matter? We need to get this right, because if we don't define the behavior in a way that everyone can understand and observe it readily in real life, we're going to end up having conflicting reports. We're going to have miscommunication with one another about how the kid behaved during that day. We're going to be less precise. So let's be more precise. So reflection questions there for yourself. Are you teaching the child to name something? How are you going to go about doing that? Are you teaching them to request for something? Is it that they have to request for something they can't see or something that they can see? Because there's a big difference. Are you asking them to repeat something after you, to fill in the blank on a worksheet, to read something, to answer a question? Is it to answer a question about something that they were just told? Because that's more complex. To select something in response to, to select something in response to something you said, to do something in response to something you said. These are all different skills. Regarding challenging behavior, it's also very important, especially when we're dealing with safety skills, or safety-related skills, I should say. You're going to get much more valuable information from teachers and teacher aides when you're asking them about behaviors you didn't see. If you ask these questions instead of accepting common phrases like, oh, you had a tough time during group, she was out of control, he had a meltdown, she just didn't want to, you're like mind reading, oh, like he obviously didn't want to. And it's like, well, hold on, what was going on? When I receive phrases like that, I think the first step is to be empathetic, by the way. I don't want people coming from here and going, yeah, that's the wrong way to communicate about behavior. Well, no, like they're trying to communicate, acknowledge where they're coming from. Thank you for telling me. But still ask more specifics. Say, can you give me some more specifics about what was happening, what he or she did, so that we can better prepare for tomorrow and that people can know what to look for, and then we can all intervene in the same way. Or we're not ready to intervene just yet. We need to get more information, but let's all gather information on the same thing. That's going to lead to better interpersonal communication on the team. Be intentional. So what are you specifically asking the child to do? Are there certain learning inputs to which the person has more difficulty responding? Do you have that kid that can respond really well when you are showing them the instruction as opposed to telling them? And then you've got some kids where you can tell them, but if you give them a worksheet, uh, they feel like they're drowning, and they're raising their hand or they're putting their head down because there's this sense of I can't do this. I need somebody to tell me what to do. So actually, one of the assessments that I use actually asks about what is the learner's preferred learning channel. So imagine a number of you are familiar with learning styles. That's talking about pretty much the same thing. What is the kid's learning style? What is their preferred learning channel, input, and even output? Because there can also be a preferred output. How they demonstrate their skills, there can be a preference. What is a response class? It's a category of responses. So some of these responses will happen simultaneously, especially when we're talking about some of the challenging behaviors, to be honest. For example, Johnny may drop in response to being told to transition from the music class to maybe back to his classroom. But there's other behaviors that are happening, and maybe yelling or making some other noises, crossing his arms. Maybe he's covering his eyes. Now, we don't need to collect data on everything that the kid is doing. We should take data on one or maybe two of the things that are happening, because we don't need to measure every little thing. We don't need to measure every little thing that the person is doing. We can have some degree of confidence that the reason why this behavior is happening, that's happening at the same time as this other behavior, if he's yelling no at the same time that he's being told to go to the classroom, and it's at the same time that he's dropped, we can rest assured probably that dropping and yelling no and crossing his arms and covering his eyes are all part of that same response class. This is just to encourage you that you don't need to take that on every single thing. All right. We can also call this grouping behaviors. It's also called a functional class. So there's different ways to conceptualize that. Not all behaviors in the functional response class necessarily have the same intensity also. Some are more concerning. Focus on the more concerning behaviors. I mean, the kid covering his eyes, unless it's a clear precursor or indication something worse is about to happen, you don't need to worry about it too much. But self-injury, dropping to the ground, hitting, like those are the more severe things to look at. Not all behaviors co-occurring necessarily have the same exact function. Maybe the kid only yells no when the verbal instruction is repeated. So that might change how we intervene when a kid is dropped to the ground and refusing to transition. You might not want to keep saying, come to the classroom. No, come to the classroom. No, every single time you're asking. Maybe you should stop telling him to come to the classroom and change your tactic. It doesn't mean the instruction is going away. It just means you might need to change your tactic because it's a reliable trigger for the challenging behavior. So communicating as a team, hopefully all of these things are going to help you collaborate better. Teacher to teacher aide, principal to teacher, CCD teacher aide. I think I'm saying that right, hopefully. To RE director, all these different dynamics, parent to teacher, teacher to parent, sacred relationship right there. Like we've got to have good communication with one another and be precise where we can. All right. Continuous measurement. So there's different ways to measure behaviors. You'll have a reference to these different types, but just to shout them out real quick. Counting the behaviors. Counting the behaviors over time. That's a level up. Like it's better to do it as number of times divided by the hour. Like, did it happen 2 times per hour is way better than it happened 2 times. That's way more information to include time. So that's my soapbox. I'm going to get off the soapbox now about that. All right. There's acceleration, which I would say you only need to do if you're getting into the field of behavior analysis. Please join us. Duration, how long a behavior happens. You might want that, especially for dropping, because it's a big difference between he dropped to the ground for a couple of minutes to he was on the ground for 2 hours. Huge difference. I think we would all agree. And that's way more impactful to that person's accessibility to everything going on around in that environment, to their learning environment, to access to peers, to access to learning opportunities. So duration can be a very helpful thing. There's some other forms here. I put in parentheses like a short definition of them. If you have questions about any of these types of measurement after the fact, just let me know. And then there's discontinuous measurement. And this is, it's not my favorite, to be honest, but it can be a more feasible thing, especially if you are strapped for resources and you're looking for something that you can quickly take data on. This is, you have a predetermined interval of time, maybe every 15 minutes. Did Johnny drop? Yes or no? And if he dropped even once, you'll put a yes for that 15-minute interval. If he didn't drop at all, it's a no for that interval. That would be partial interval. If it's whole interval, because you are seeing these 2-hour spans, well, then you're looking at, did it occur, the behavior occur continuously throughout? Was Johnny dropped for the entire 15 minutes? Yes. If he was only dropped for 13 out of the 15 minutes, you put a no. So that would be a difference of how you take those. Sorry, let me start that over. There would be a difference between how you take the data for partial interval versus whole interval data. And then momentary time sampling is the easiest. That's one is, you look at the end of the 15 minutes. Is he on the ground? Yes or no? Just in that moment in time. It's in the name, momentary time sampling. Yes, he's on the ground. He's on the ground. Now, on a more positive note, you could do the planned activity check, which is when you can do momentary time sampling, but you can do it with your whole class. So for those of you that are looking like, okay, like these are good, with my learners that have more challenges, but also just classroom management in general, I'm wanting to look at seeing how the kids are actively engaged. You could do a quick head count of which kids are looking at their worksheets at the end of a 15-minute interval. And then for that interval, you can count the number of kids that were looking at their worksheet if they're all supposed to be doing like independent work during that time. And that can be a good self-check of like, have I created something that the kids can be self-guided in? But that's called the Platchek. All right, moving on. What is a stimulus? A stimulus is any energy change that affects an organism through its receptor cells. That's another very nerdy definition. So let's break that down. It's something we experience in our environment. That's it. It's a thing. It's probably not the best definition to give, but it's a thing. It's anything. It's something we experience. And it can be felt internally or it can be felt externally. And of course, we as Catholics, we would acknowledge that we also have spiritual circumstances. So it's not just things in the physical environment, but there's things going on spiritually. So for Johnny, let's say he's only dropping in response to the verbal instruction. Oh, wait, is it when he hears the bell at the end of music class? Now I need to be more decisive about when I'm going in with giving him a heads up, showing him his visual schedule of what we're doing next. Like, I need to be mindful of when is the stimulus happening, because that's going to help me determine when I need to intervene. So why in the world should I know what a stimulus is? I had a lot of fun writing out that title, because I'm sure there's some people who are like, why are we talking about stimuli or stimulus? We need to pay attention. This goes along with the precision and the learning channel. We need to be more precise. We need to up our game as a church, as a Catholic school system, and we're going to be able to serve more individuals than we do now if we up our game and we be more precise about what we are doing in our interventions, in our teaching strategies, all of it. So I feel very strongly about this. We're going to keep going. We need to give proper attention to the stimuli that are supposed to be related to one another. If you want these different concepts to be connected in your CCD class, in your reading class, in your history class, and all these different classes, you got to look at them in this beautiful web, this cluster web of all these different things being related to one another. And some are equal signs, and some are greater than or equal or less than signs. Some are, this is part of this thing. Some are, this is different than this thing. We need to be mindful of those different relationships that these concepts have to one another when we're talking to a kid about history and religion and science, just to name a few. Okay, the learning channel matrix revisited here. Here says 4 when verbally told 2 + 2 equals. Kid says 4. C's writes 4 when shown 2 + 2 on a worksheet. Johnny covers his eyes. There's 2 different responses there to the same mathematical question, right? Why is Johnny covering his eyes when it's on a worksheet, but he's fine when you just verbally say it? Also, does he know that this is 2 when you're doing this? Or is that a memorized verbal response that he's learned? It can be a bit of a watershed here for some people when you realize, oh, like they've just memorized this as a verbal response, but they don't get the concept of 2 means 2, like 1 and 2 of a certain thing, of a class. And then that you combine them and it makes 1, 2, 3, 4 of that class. That mathematical concept, like not taking that for granted. Also, the preferred learning channel is there. Johnny's fine when you're talking to him. He loves that. But when you put the worksheet there, oh, there's baggage. There's learning history there. Oh, that's what table work. When they give me worksheets, I usually fail at that. I usually get a bunch of red marks on it. There's a lot of baggage there, emotional baggage. So again, being more precise, knowing what stimuli are triggering what. All right, next concept, reinforcement, a process by which something happens after the behavior and the behavior increases over time. That's it. That's what reinforcement means in ABA. Positive reinforcement is that something is added. All right, we're going to get into negative reinforcement in a moment. And some of you already know the distinction. Some of you, I can tell, have had some ABA training already by some of your responses. But for positive reinforcement, something's added. When Johnny asks for a musical instrument politely using please during music class, he gets a musical instrument. Over time, he says please more frequently. So the behavior we're talking about is saying please. He says please more frequently than he did before. So saying please is positively reinforced by what? What was added? A musical instrument. That was the stimulus, back to that word, added. And then the behavior went up. Which brings us to ABA myth number 7. What about ABA myth number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? They're in episode 1. So if you haven't seen it yet, you got to go back to episode 1. Number 7, ABA just uses bribery with food and toys. That should be cited. I'm going to tell you right now what that is. I make mistakes frequently. There we go. That's from Kennedy Krieger, 2016. It's in the resources or references at the end of the slideshow. All right. What is bribery? If we're going to tackle that myth, we should probably talk about what is bribery, because I hear that sometimes. Like, I don't want to just bribe the kid. Okay. Bribery is a legal term outlining when it's not okay to offer reinforcers for certain behaviors, usually with public officials or others in authority. We're talking about children here. we all learned through positive reinforcement, which at some point was food and toys. I mean, you putting a happy face on a kid's day chart or 100 on the corner of their graded worksheet, what would you define that as? Well, in ABA, we would define that as a positive reinforcer. It's something that's added in order to increase a behavior. What behaviors are you increasing? You're increasing academic skills. You're increasing when the kid says please and thank you because you smile. You smile in response. That's something added. That is something added. And the behavior increases over time. You've got a positive reinforcer. Are you bribing? Of course not. You're teaching. So the word bribery has a lot of, let me use the word baggage again. It has a lot of baggage with it. It's an unhelpful critique. So eventually we learned to be motivated beyond food and toys. Hopefully most of us, I mean, I'm still motivated by a gift card to Chipotle, but I, in general, am more motivated by the social approval, the personal sense of accomplishment, on my better days, saintlier days, approval by God, as we all should strive for. In order to help a child get there, I'm not saying that it should be toys and food forever. We should be moving towards trying to help them move into a social reinforcement. That's actually part of one of the assessments that we use, is to help move them from those tangible things to social reinforcers, to get them more motivated and interested in that. So, for example, behavior-specific praise is often given with access to the toy. I love how you said, please, Johnny. That made me feel so good. Like, saying things like that help to start pivot that kid away. You know, this toy is great, but man, when, you know, Mr. Clem looked at me and gave me that big smile and high-fived me, I felt like $1,000,000. And it's in strengthening that social connection happening afterwards. That's what it's all about when we're trying to help them move beyond food and toys. So are you open to doing what's necessary given where the kid is at motivationally right now? Or are you trying to impose, like, this kid needs to just be motivated by doing the right thing and it needs to be its own reward for itself? I think you know where I stand on it, but I think that we need to start where the kid is at, and then we need to, of course, quickly enrich it with a lot of social praise so that they can eventually be at that point where they're not dependent on the toys and the food as reinforcers. Negative reinforcement. I didn't write it down, but I need to say this. Negative reinforcement is not punishment. We're going to get to punishment in a moment. Negative reinforcement is something is subtractive. Think mathematical operations here. Like, if positive reinforcement is something was added, like a high five after the kid said please. Here's another one. When Johnny drops to the ground, he avoids the transition to the classroom. Over time, he drops to the ground more frequently. Johnny's dropping to the ground is negatively reinforced by avoiding the math exercises at the next location. Johnny hates math. Johnny's dropping more. So that's what makes it reinforcement, because the behavior is increasing. But something's being subtracted. It's the class. It's the math class. It's avoiding the math class. That's what makes it negative reinforcement, because something is subtracted or avoided by doing the behavior. So he's going to do more of that behavior in order to avoid the math class. We got to look at math. How do we make it more fun? How do we make it more accessible and at a level that he can do? My daughter has homework. I nag her to do it and remind her that she cannot watch TV until she finishes it. Over time, she does her homework more frequently in this absolutely make-believe fantasy scenario. There's no basis in reality for it. It doesn't actually work. But let's pretend for a second. Her behavior of finishing her homework is both negatively reinforced by removing my nagging and positively reinforced by accessing TV. So she does her homework more. I'll let you know if it actually gets better. That this actually does not work, but I felt like it would still be a helpful example. Some other things about reinforcement, differential reinforcement. We're not just reinforcing everything willy-nilly. We're reinforcing things that are specific while preventing reinforcement of other behaviors, right? If you're trying to reinforce a replacement behavior, but the challenging behavior is continuing to be reinforced, it's going to be more difficult to reduce that challenging behavior and to increase that replacement behavior. That's not to say that I'm not trying to be ivory tower here. I've done that before where, okay, we're just going to enrich the day. We're going to have all things fun available, regardless of whether or not the kid is doing what they're supposed to be doing. And that's an actual approach called non-contingent reinforcement. And there's actually research to back up that approach. Is it always appropriate to do that approach? No. Is it always the best thing to do the differential reinforcement? No. It depends. It depends on the context. It depends on the severity of the behavior, on so many things. That's why it's important, in all of these things, if you're having some doubts, seek out that professional help. We're going to talk about resources in part 3. Reinforcers should be learner specific. We're going to discuss preference assessments a bit later. And if the behavior is not increasing, guess what? It's not a reinforcer. It's not. Functionally, it is not a reinforcer. It's a reward. It's something you are giving and saying, please care about this thing. And if it's not increasing the behavior, it's not a reinforcer. So we need to go back to the drawing board sometimes. Are we giving enough of it? Are we giving the best quality of it? I didn't write all these different strategies down, but there's a number of things to consider when you're looking at finding the best thing that's most likely to increase a behavior. Also, physiological states. We talked about that briefly, that they're not behaviors, but they matter. How many of us have had kids where they were very tired from a poor night of sleep, and then they, quote unquote, don't want to do anything? I mean, that's a pretty common experience. So fatigue, hunger, thirst, pain, those things matter, and we need to be mindful of them. And what they actually do is they decrease the value of the reinforcer or the power of that reinforcer. So you might have a reinforcer that usually works, but because you've got this physiological state going on, it decreases the power of that reinforcer. So that's something to think about. Punishment. Okay, a process by which something happens after the behavior and the behavior decreases over time. And just like with reinforcement, there's positive and negative, the things that are added and the things that are subtracted. Positive punishment. My daughter keeps leaving the kitchen table where her unfinished homework is. I obviously have issues. I'm still thinking about this. I tell her to go back to the table and that I can help her if she has any questions about her homework. Over time, she stops leaving the table or at least gets up less frequently. Again, in this make-believe fantasy scenario. That's punishment? Well, yeah, because the behavior decreased after I added something. It's positive punishment. Not because it's pleasant, because positive doesn't mean pleasant in ABA. Positive means added. Think math. What did I add? I added my redirection and my offer to help her. This is a bit of a hot take on punishment. Punishment does not need to suck. Punishment does not need to be the most awful thing, awful experience in that child's world. Negative punishment. Something is subtracted. Siblings are fighting over a toy. That was literally happening about 1 hour ago. Siblings, they fight over it. They fight. You take the toy away. Over time, when the siblings have access to the same toy, they fight less, at least when daddy's around, because they know that if they're going to fight over it, there's that possibility that the toy is going to be taken away from both of them. However, you're also a good parent and teacher, so you taught them how to take turns and compromise and play interactively with that toy and creatively combining it with other toys. All right. So I'm adding in some teaching to do some other things, which brings us to myth number 8. ABA relies on punishment and aversives. This also comes from Kennedy Krieger. They're listing out the myths. They know they are myths. Kennedy Krieger says they are myths. I should clarify that. All right. First of all, punishment is a natural phenomenon experienced by all of us. We all experience aversive experiences, unpleasant things that make us less likely to do a behavior. And we also do behaviors to avoid experiencing those things that we've never experienced. I don't run onto the highway because I believe I will be run over by a car. Now, that's a more complex thing and it has to do with rules. We're not going to get into that today, but punishment is not inherently bad. It's natural in this life, actually. However, if we artificially create those contingencies, it's a serious clinical decision. I'm going to say that again. It's a serious clinical decision to artificially create a punishment mechanism. I didn't say unethical. I said serious. It should be taken seriously, but it is within the ethical bounds. We're supposed, as behavior analysts, we're supposed to exhaust all other strategies, show that the risk is too high to not use punishment procedures. That's the way we think about it. It's got to be a very serious situation. In other words, it needs to be more dangerous to the client and others to not use punishment than if we were to use it. It needs to be more dangerous for me to only do positive reinforcement strategies and keep everything very, pleasant and quote unquote nice, than if I were to not do it in order for it to be considered ethical. All right. So here's some considerations regarding punishment. And by the way, in me doing this, I'm not going out there and saying like, go and do punishment procedures. I'm letting you know what are some of the guiding principles. Here are some things to consider. There are side effects of punishment. And we need a plan for that. That's part of our ethical code as behavior analysts. Emotional reactions, aggressive reactions, escape and avoidance, a higher rate of challenging behavior when the person who administers a punishment is not present. So, oh, daddy's not here. Now we can really fight over this toy. Like now we're going to really have it out because daddy's not here to save you, younger sibling. Anyways, I'm talking about my own kids, so that's fine, right? Might involve modeling undesirable behavior because what would we want to see the kids or adults that we're working with to do something similar to what we are doing when we're needing to administer a correction? So that's a good reality check for us to look at ourselves in the mirror when we're handing out that presumably just consequence, corrective action. So we need to be careful with that. I got a good question here. Can punishment be considered a consequence of behavior, either positive or negative consequence? Punishment can be a natural consequence for things. That's what I'm saying. For us to artificially create a punisher, then that's an ethical decision making that needs to happen. Punishment versus consequence. Yeah. So consequence is anything that happens after a behavior. I got another question here. So consequence is anything that happens after a behavior in ABA terminology. Sometimes it has the connotation of punishment. So thank you for asking that question. Punishment can be, I see what's being asked here. Positive or negative consequence. The only thing that makes it positive or negative in terms of being a consequence is if something was added or if something was removed. That's it. If you're asking me, can punishment be considered pleasant versus aversive. Well, I gave you that example of like, sweetie, please come back to the table. I can help you with your homework. I'd like to think that's a pretty pleasant redirection, and it's constructive. I'm trying to build up my daughter, and like I build up her confidence. Like, you can do this. I'm connecting with her. Um, so hopefully that answers your questions. But thank you so much for bringing up that consequence versus punishment. Also, it can lead to being overused due to the relief of the adult who administers it. Because punishment in the moment, it can work pretty quickly, and that can be very satisfying to the adult who's trying to work with this kid. And so there's a danger in overusing it because, oh wow, oh, they stopped doing that behavior. A behavior that would necessitate a punishment. It's a behavior that you have tried to correct with simply positively reinforcing the replacement behavior, and it's still not working, and you don't have a way of preventing the reinforcer from happening. I'll give you an example. If I have a kid who is, I'm trying to give a fictional example because I want to respect my client's privacy. Give me a second. If I have a client who is using their knuckles to hit the back of their hand repeatedly, but they do that behavior regardless of whether or not they're receiving instructions or getting attention for it or getting something else out of it. It's just that it feels good for them to some degree. Maybe they do it more when they're frustrated, but they'll still do it even when they're alone. You might need to do something where there's a deterrent. Like, oh, I don't want to do that behavior because then this might happen. And also, of course, we got to meet those needs in other ways, and we still have to teach. We still have to teach. And this brings me to some of these other things. And these are all really good questions. I got to keep going because I want to be respectful of people's time. There will be Q&A at the end because this is definitely the most feedback I'm getting right now on this topic. I would say punishment needs to be corrective. It needs to be constructive. We're not trying to destroy somebody. We're just trying to construct a healthier version of that same person. We're trying to teach a new skill in the midst of all of that. Teach a replacement behavior. Thank you, Casey. Empathize, comfort, and reassure as necessary immediately as possible. Consistent intensity. Because if you dance around with the intensity of how much you're punishing versus not punishing, that can lead to a lack of surety on the part of the child. There's an unpredictability that's scary. Like daddy might give me like a big punishment or a little punishment. And either is not great because if there's like this fear factor of like he might blow off like his lid and do something crazy if I do this behavior. So it's like fear. Or, daddy, he might not. And then it's gambling, like daddy sometimes just gives me a warning. Like I'm still going to do that behavior. Dude, he's just going to give me a warning. He usually gives me a warning first. And then you start seeing some of the playing around with the person giving that consequence that is intended to decrease the behavior, which we call a punisher, right? And then you decide that day, nope, no warnings. I'm just immediately going to give that punisher. Then the kid is all affronted. Like, what? No, I usually get warnings. And then you have an even more emotional response because you have this unpredictability of how the adult is going to respond. So have a plan and stick to it. That's the takeaway. Have a plan and stick to it. I would recommend you have a professional working with you if you're going to do this. Also, don't embarrass them in front of others. That's a big thing. St. John Bosco is a big inspiration for me. He's one of our 3 patron saints of youth apostles in my community. And he's got some similar words on punishment. He says, only do it as a last resort. Never reprimand anyone in public unless it's a case of forestalling or repairing scandal, correction is to be private and fatherly, motherly for the woman out there, with no excessive reproaching. Don't act out of anger. That's another bullet point. Wait until you're in control of yourself. These are good reminders for me in my parenting. Always leave the culprit with the hope of pardon. You're not trying to destroy the person. You're trying to help construct them and better prepare them for a brighter future. The first and best type of punishment is the disappointed yet loving face as that of a father. So how should I correct Johnny with all these things in mind? It's a conversation. It's a conversation to have as a team, but those are hopefully some good guiding principles to consider. Do you have a look of love on Johnny in that moment? Are you willing to tell him in both love and truth what are the consistent limits of what he's allowed to do versus what he's not allowed to do? Are you being patient with him as you're trying to teach him new skills of self-advocating and tolerating the things he doesn't like? Hebrews 12, verses 5 through 11, I recommend looking that up. Receiving the discipline as love is a big thing for us in our faith. And then I also have a reflection here. This is in your slides. I'm not going to read it out just for the sake of time because I want us to get to the next part. But I do write online on some of these topics of how behavior science and our faith intersect. So that'll be at the end of your slideshow, a link to that. Scheduled reinforcement is another concept. Please look at this later, but how frequently you reinforce matters, because you don't want the kid to be super dependent on getting the thing all the time that they like. You want to systematically fade that out, especially because you're trying to move them towards social reinforcers. So a couple of quick examples. Move from, today, if you raise your hand 5 times or less during 30 minutes, you will get a star. Tomorrow, it'll be 3 or less. That's for a kid that's raising their hand too much. For the kid that's not raising their hand enough, today, if you raise your hand 2 times or more, you will get a star. Tomorrow, it will be 3 or more to get that star. So you see, those are a couple of many different examples there of how we can be more intentional about helping the kid be less dependent on reinforcers. All right, and it all moves towards natural reinforcers. The things that you and I are motivated by. I'm not sure what motivated you to be on this webinar tonight. It probably wasn't food or toys. It was probably something that was a bit more internal, maybe something more noble, I'd like to think. So how do we help a kid move towards those other motivations? A token board or a special toy or privilege might not always be available. So again, how can we help them move towards being motivated by social integration, independence, self-confidence, those kinds of things? A lot of it comes down to the relationship. Focus on the relationship. Prompts. What is a prompt? My favorite definition of a prompt is actually in the Spanish glossary of ABA terms. And it's, for those who know Spanish, ayuda, which is literally help. Para ayudarle. That's it. A prompt is a help to make the behavior, that skill happen. Beyond the signal. If you want to think signal is the learning input that you want to have there. Here sees someone Jesus when given an array of 3 pictures, and one of them is Jesus and the other 2 are Mary and Saint Joseph. And you say the prompt is that you point to the picture of Jesus. So you see the signal is find Jesus, but you point to the picture of Jesus. Now you've added a prompt. Now you've added something that's helping that skill happen in that moment. Why? Because the kid's going to come into contact with your social praise all the quicker, or a token from their token board all the quicker. Help them come into contact with positive reinforcers quicker. And then you fade out that prompt where you're not pointing anymore. So you say, find Jesus, And the kid points to the picture of Jesus. You found Jesus! Yay! Switched up the pictures. Find Jesus. And you might have a kid where they still need you to point, but you might get to that part where you ask that question and the kid finds Jesus in a different position and touches Jesus. What have you done? You faded the prompt already. And there's a fun little visual here I use. I'm gonna skip the other slide for a second. You want the prompt to eventually fade out into nothing, so that it's only the signal then that is evoking the response, evoking the skill. We use lots of different prompts in order to teach. We use material prompts, gesture prompts, like I just modeled for you. Model prompts, I'm modeling right now so that you can do this in the future. Expectant looks, you ever like kind of go, because you're trying to get the kid to say please when they're asking for something? That's a prompt. All right. Proximity, sometimes just you being there is enough. All right. Auditory prompts, sometimes you indirectly say something. It's a bit of a clue. That's really helpful when you have a kid that has more advanced verbal behavior, or sorry, like conversation skills, I would say. Direct would be you're telling them exactly what to say. Some kids need that. And then finally, touch prompts, especially with daily living skills. And maybe, with genuflecting, we were talking about that earlier, you're like just helping like them tap their knee, like, okay, like, but you're not telling them to genuflect, because one of those prompts is going to be easier to fade out than the other. When you're looking at daily living skills or gross motor actions like genuflecting, it's easier to fade out touch prompts, physical prompts, and visual prompts than it is to fade out the verbal prompts. So that's a bit of a deep cut based on my own experiences, because I've just found if you put in extra verbiage, extra verbal instructions for that kid, they get locked into that, and then they feel they need to hear that instruction every single time that you want the skill to happen. It's harder to extricate yourself from it. There's some different examples here of how to fade out. Like if you'll go from a full physical prompt to a touch prompt to a gesture prompt, go from a full verbal prompt to an indirect verbal clue. These are all different examples. The way in which you prompt is going to affect your teaching. So again, this is here for reference. We got to keep going because we only got 20 minutes left here, and I definitely need to be done by then. The first step in assessing a child is exploring the overall background and history of the child. Find out from the adults who know the child best. We have now moved out of concepts and procedures into assessing, because we can't assess unless we've got the concepts down. For example, if I'm looking at strengths and weaknesses of a kid, what am I really looking at here? I'm looking at preferred learning channels, preferred learning styles. If I'm looking at skill deficits, I need to know my pinpoints. What am I specifically talking about? Like 101 reading instruction. There is a difference between decoding and reading comprehension. So how are you pinpointing that? The kid can read at like a 5th grade level, even high school level, but they can't answer questions at a 2nd grade level. There's a difference in these skills. And pinpointing can help you ascertain where you need to be focused. Challenging behaviors. Again, if you're assessing challenging behaviors, you got to know which behaviors you're talking about. You can't put down meltdown. Meltdown is not approved. Do not put that in your ABC data or notes to your supervisor. So-and-so had a meltdown. That's where I will be ivory tower, because I'm leading this webinar and I can say things like this. You don't put down that Johnny had a meltdown. You say Johnny dropped to the ground. Johnny cried. That's helpful information, because Johnny has not cried the last like 5 times this has happened. There might be something different going on this time. What happened? Like, why was he crying? Like, that's why we need to be more precise when we're assessing. There's some different skills-based assessments here. I think given I have my opinions on which ones I think would be most helpful, but it's going to depend on what you're trying to accomplish at your Catholic school or your CCD class, or if you're a parent who's trying to find out what's best for your child. If you're a parent, by the way, and you're not receiving any ABA services, I mean, we're going to talk about resources next episode, but I mean, you don't need to worry about this. Use the pinpoints, use, what you know already. And play to your child's strengths and systematically reduce your prompts. There's not really a lot of magic here with what we do in ABA. But I do think that ABLES and AFLs are two particular assessments that are comprehensive and helpful. And then preference assessments are helpful, finding out what a kid likes and why it might be a reinforcer. Might. It's not guaranteed, because they might like it when it's available for free, but when it's something that's contingent on doing things, on doing expected behaviors, all of a sudden the kid's like, I don't want that anymore. Is it a reinforcer? Not necessarily. It could be a preference, but it's not necessarily a reinforcer. So that's another distinction to be mindful of. There's some links there that actually show video models of how to do those preference assessments. That is so helpful. So helpful. CCD, Catholic school, please look at that, because that can be so helpful for figuring out what's going to be most engaging and fun for the kid in those settings to help them feel more comfortable. I think about like fidgets. That's a big thing, like having fidgets at a table to help the kid be more relaxed and engaged. That's a super helpful thing. In terms of functional behavior assessment, that's the big one, right? Why is the kid doing that behavior that is really challenging or problematic or unsafe? So Carmen actually introduced me to one classroom manual, which is from the Archdiocese of St. Louis, Missouri. Awesome document. It's massive. We don't have time to cover it all, but I pulled this out. I'll pull out a little bit more, I think, during the next episode too. But in a perfect world, you're going to have somebody who can do it on staff. But if you don't, I love this. Reach out to parishioners or other community members and ask for an FBA. I wholeheartedly agree. So this brings me to the critical note I have in every episode. You don't need to wait for a Catholic behavior analyst. I'd rather you find somebody that's effective and ethical, that's not Catholic, than to wait around for a Catholic behavior analyst, or find one that's not practicing ethically or effectively. Hopefully they are, right? But it's more important to get the services. And somebody who's practicing ethically and effectively is going to respect our religious and spiritual values and the spiritual and religious values of the client, of the child and the child's family. So quick notes about FBAs, or functional behavior assessments. It can involve the case file review, a functional assessment interview where you're just interviewing the person that knows them best, and ABC data, what happened right before the behavior, what happened right after the behavior. And it needs to be quick, it needs to be efficient. And a functional analysis is you actually test it out as an experiment. That needs to be done by a professional. If you're on purpose triggering a behavior, which doesn't actually have to be the unsafe behavior, by the way. Like maybe it's just like the kid starts whining and then you stop the experiment. But you did it like on purpose. Like you presented whatever it was that seems to be bothering the kid or causing that unsafe behavior to happen. That's called a functional analysis. And again, I would stick to a professional doing that. You don't need to do that. But it is efficient, and you're going to have a higher degree of certainty that this is the function of the behavior. That's why it is done in our field. Here are common strategies, though. The ABC data, the interview, scatter plot. When is the behavior happening? Is it a certain time of day? Oh, it's always happening before math class. There we go. Questionnaires. That's another method that's used. The common functions of behavior, sometimes it is affectionately termed everybody eats. I like it and I don't like it. I'll tell you why in a second. Escape and avoidance, that's when they're avoiding something or escaping something. There's something there that they don't like. They're trying to get away from it. Or there's something over there and they do everything they can to stay away from that place over there. Work tasks, transitions, changes to routine, doctor and dentist visits, you name it. Attention and or audience, they want the attention. They want the that reaction. Sometimes no reactions. They just want the audience. It's enough that somebody's there. And people forget that. Like, well, we didn't react, but they kept doing that ridiculous behavior. And you didn't need to react. They had the audience. That's enough. That's all they wanted. So, credit where credit's due. They are motivated to do that behavior if there's an audience, even if they're not getting the feedback that they want. All right, tangible and or activity, toys, games, any item with which the learner plays. And then finally, sensory. We kind of touched a little bit on this, like when the behavior itself is reinforcing. They'll do it when they're alone even. That is the hardest behavior to decrease. Just a heads up. So if you're like, it is so hard to decrease that behavior that like they do because it feels good. I hope that you feel validated in hearing that. It is the most difficult behavior to decrease. You can seek out professional help with that. Overlap of functions. I made this because the reason I don't like everybody eats is that we sometimes get into that category mindset. And it's like, well, they're not doing it for escape. They're doing it for attention. They're not doing it for attention. They're doing it because they get to play with that toy over there. It's like, well, what it might be is it's probably some kind of synthesis of all these different things. And in fact, in our field, we call it synthesized contingencies and our synthesized reinforcement. It's a synthesis, a combination of all these different things that are happening. So that's something else to consider. It doesn't fall neatly into this category and this category. Oh yeah, that's an escape maintained behavior. Thank you very much. It's like, no, we need to look at things in the full context. So in this mock example, ABC data shows a pattern in which Johnny drops to the ground at the end of music class. I need everybody to put it on their thinking cap because I'm going to ask you what we should do. When the bell rings for transitioning to the next classroom, that's when it happens. Johnny drops to the ground at the end of music class when the bell rings. Behavior is consistently dropping or onto the ground. Oh, there's a grammatical error. I apologize. And if he has a musical instrument in his hands, he plays with it. Consequence typically given is asking him to put the musical instrument in the basket. If he puts it in the basket, he covers his ears and subsequent instructions to transition are followed by him yelling no. Interviewing the staff, they comment that he seems to be dropped for a longer period of time on days that he has not had music class for a while. Maybe he's got medical appointments that make it such that that's the case. Parents also were interviewed and shared that Johnny loves music and frequently plays with instruments at home. They also report that presenting math exercises to Johnny after music class and at other times during the week, and parents also said homework, they just avoid math altogether, results in him putting his head down on the table or hiding under his desk. Okay, what should we do for Johnny? We have a bunch of very intelligent people that have been in this field actually longer than I have, much longer. And I'm really excited to hear from you all. What should we do? All right. Offer music instruments as a reward for doing math problems to help him like math. Okay, so I do like the switcheroo. Okay, incorporate some songs or music into math class. Ooh, beautiful antecedent intervention. Give him a musical instrument for a few minutes after every class, then give him it for a longer period after math. Ooh, that way you don't have to worry about taking it away as much. Yeah. Does he have a visual to help transition? Fine question. Offer a transition item. Stop the bell after music class and give him a different transitional option. Excellent. Have him play an instrument and sing along with him for a moment. I love it. Pairing with him, being with him in the thing that he cares about. That's relationship building. I love it. Requiring him to only complete necessary math problems and rewarding that. Sometimes there's just too many problems and so reducing the workload. Yeah, and I'll take it a step further. You could just look at could some of the math problems be below his instructional level, something mastered. So I just jumped on that bandwagon, Caitlin. Hope that was okay. All right. Move him to music class at the end of the day. So that's the reward. Woo! If you've got that flexibility with your principal, I love that principal. That's great. And I mean that seriously because I think sometimes I'd love to be a principal for a day. Probably everybody would hate me by the end, but when you have an administration that's flexible in that way, it's gold. It's absolutely wonderful. If you're an administration, that's wonderful. If you have that kind of flexibility, or allow your teacher to have like a short-term flexibility like that. I understand you got to keep things flowing, keep things managed well. But thank you for saying that, Allison. Yeah, these are great. It's complex, and of course, we don't have all the information here. This is not an actual case. This is kind of a synthesis of a bunch of different cases in my head that I've had in the past. It's combining multiple clients, multiple diagnoses, but this is a common kind of thing. And I wonder if you've never had this experience, will you in the future? And are we as a church equipping ourselves to be able to take in more children that have some of these challenges and be competent and confident to work with them in that, to accompany these families? With that, I think that we are near the end. At the end of an assessment, you might end up with the following: case conceptualization, hypothesized function or reason of the behavior, a list of the child's preferences, a list of the child's most significant skill deficits to target, and a list of the child's most significant challenging behaviors and what the function of those behaviors are. So not just a list of the behaviors, but also the functions that we think are with it. And that can be determined by a functional analysis or hypothesized by a functional behavior assessment. So at this point, we can open it up to some questions. Cardamom, are we okay to have some time for that?
Yes, definitely. And you know what? I would just say to everybody, if you are, pressed for time and you have to pop off, let's go ahead. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope you will come back next time where we're going to have a little bit more time. I think we said it's a little bit more open-ended. There'll be more time for questions. But right now, if Joey, if you're available for a few more minutes, what we'll do is we'll stop the recording and we'll give people maybe like 10 minutes to just go ahead and ask questions if that's okay with you, Joey.
I have 10 minutes. That's fine.
Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and do that. I will go ahead and stop the recording.
Thank you.
And, if you have a question, put it in the chat, or maybe, we could stop the screen share and you can just go on video and we can have a face-to-face conversation. So anyway, thank you again, all of you. And please join us on August 13th. Thank you very much for our webinar. So we're going to take a week off so that Joy can go on vacation. And
thanks.
Then we will we'll come back on August 13th and have, a little bit more information for you as far as resources and assessments. So here we go.